is our elementary principal, so we will have two people that can speak to some of the administrative things that are happening in this building. Morgan Burris, Bridget Tippett's here as well, so you'll be able to share some of your knowledge, and welcome aboard pretty soon Tom Ingwell. He'll be joining us that semester as part of our staff. So we'll have a wealth of people from inside the building to speak about what we see day to day and some of those operations. But we're really looking for that outside perspective even more so to get your opinions on where our elementary building should go in terms of capacity and accessibility for our kids. So that's really our charge, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But before I get too much into our charge tonight and our journey that's going to be ahead of us, it's really good for us to make sure we know each other. So this will be the hardest thing you do tonight. Welcome.
Hey!
Come on in. Got an agenda for you. We're just getting started. The hardest thing you'll do tonight is try to find somebody that you know the least in here and get to know them better. So I know a lot of you naturally sat next to somebody you know really well, maybe or maybe not. But if you can get up and move around, here's the instructions. All right, you need a pencil or a scratch piece of paper. It does nothing that you're going to turn in, and possibly a pencil or pen. I've got more up here if you need some. The person that you know least, I'm going to ask you to interview them for 90 seconds, minute and a half. It's going to go really fast. You got to get to know as much as you can about them in 90 seconds. And the only question you have to ask is, what interest did you have in serving in this committee? What brought you here today? Why were you interested to say yes to signing up and being part of this journey? So that's the only question you have to ask. Everything else is fair game. You can get as far as you can get in 90 seconds. I'm going to stop you. We're going to flip. You'll ask the next person the same question somewhere along that 90-second journey, and then you're going to introduce your guest that you met and tell us all about what you've learned in those short 90 seconds. Any questions on the task at hand? All right, so you get 30 seconds to go find somebody new. So you got to stand up and move around, and I know it's uncomfortable. It's the hardest thing to do all night. If there's not a number, we're going to throw you in there.
Why were you interested? Well, you
That's the hard part. Is
that okay?
Pick Jesse.
Well, I know.
You guys can interview each other.
I really don't know her that well.
Matt, you can join us if you're welcome. Matt, you can join us.
I've already done it.
Oh, you already gone?
Yeah, we did this already.
Okay, why do you want to be on the committee?
I need to ask you anything else, because you just said no question.
Actually, it's my focus is
Yeah.
and also I would like to see something done with that parking lot. I feel like
I worked in it. I was in I worked in HR.
I'm also kind of teacher. Who's in charge of that? So
30 seconds. 30 seconds. And then we'll change.
that's kind of
Today was number 7. Yeah, I went to a school at Weve.
okay, so my oldest is in 8th grade. And every year where she's halfway through so she is pretty much
Okay, wrap up your question.
and then
I
actually
And if you haven't already done so, you're now going to change. The interviewer becomes the interviewee, and we're going to turn the tables. So you got 90 seconds, learn as much as you can.
at the elementary, and then I have a 3rd grader who's 3 So tell me something, how long have you been in your lifelong? think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, on the scale that weighs out. What was your reason for volunteering?
So when you were teaching here at Middle Point, did they have this building then? Did they? Oh, of course, because it's the new high school. That's the building that's new. So this would be here for a long time.
30 seconds.
So, and were you teaching at the new high school?
You got it though. Yeah. And that's fine.
So did you work at home?
So what you do? 3 kids and a job.
And then,
And do you have children?
Let's see. What?
And it started to fill up, he's like, you weren't lying.
I was a high school math teacher before.
The school was built in 1994. It was 21 years ago.
Kind of when you find out I didn't have kids, why do you teach with kids? Okay, I'm sorry, that's not really how I see it. I have 150 children, I don't even know. I really, I should that was interesting.
Okay, time's up.
Whereas I saw it the other way.
Let's take a few minutes here.
I think
to
the
go
role is
through.
different, but other than that, they got a new coach.
Hopefully you got a chance to learn a little bit about somebody that you didn't know everything about. I know it's hard when you know just about everybody in the room, but hopefully you were able to take a little bit of journey. Jesse, I'm going to start with you. Would you introduce Tom and tell me a little bit more about what you learned about Tom?
Sure. Tom is the new physical education teacher here at the elementary school. He has 4 children currently in the district. His 5? Okay, in the elementary school. 1 will be going to middle school next year. Right, got it. And interest in the facilities, but also the capacity of our teachers as an instructor as well. He has a little bit of interest because a lot of times the physical education classes are moved. And what is that room, what are the rooms used for, concert, facility, structures, event planning, where do they go, but mainly because of his children.
Super. Tom, who'd you meet?
I had Jessie, even though Jessie and I both knew each other. She has 3 kids in district. Last time she remembered renovation was she was in 5th grade from here. So biggest thing was just looking at open enrollment and numbers of students in the district, especially in the elementary here, and just the overall cost of improvements. You know, if you look at that down the road here. And she also, I think, recruited 4 people to be here tonight as well, too, so.
All right, so you can blame Jesse later.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Now let's stay at this table. Go ahead.
Okay, I met Lea McDonald. She is a mother of 3. They live in Mineral Point up on Fair Street. She works at Heartland in Dodgeville as a lender. And she wanted to get involved because she has children in the district and she just wants to keep up on what's going to happen and any changes involved.
Great, thank you. Lea?
So I met Gail. She's native to Mineral Point. She helped with the construction of the high school at the point that was put together and wants to see what's needed at the elementary school level. She has 3 girls, 1 who's still in school here, and she likes to golf and crochet.
That was my like to go.
Struggling golfer like the rest of us. Welcome. Matt, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, Matt Renwick, principal here at Mineral Point Elementary. Joelle and I interviewed each other. We both agreed that we should be here because Luke has to. So we were happy to be here.
Yeah. Let's go with Maggie.
Yes, I met Courtney. Courtney was born and raised in Mineral Point, class of '98. She went to Madison for university for about 8 years and then returned to Mineral Point to raise a family. Has been here now for around 10 years. She was interested in, she has a kindergartner and a 4th grader. She was interested in participating in this committee because, well, of course, she has children in the district and has interest for that reason, but beyond that, wanted to challenge herself to take on something new and different in 2017, wanted to be more part of the community and bring in some community service aspects to her life. And she is interested in photography, most
Fantastic.
specifically nature and portraits of her kids.
So I met Maisie, who's been in Mineral Point for about 3 years, and you're part owner of Mayhem, correct?
Mayday Press.
Mayday, that's right, I'm sorry. Why do I
Mayhem
think
is
it's Mayhem?
funny though. That's like an interesting, yeah, pretty much every day a little bit. That's right.
Actually, I was in there last Christmas, I need to get back there. You have a first grader named Gus in the district, and before, most recently you lived right outside of Madison before moving here, and then you're in Seattle, working at a nonprofit. And she wanted to, maybe wanted to take a really active role and be part of this committee, as she thinks community service involvement is really important. And this is, you're not new to committees. I think this is definitely something we're definitely going to benefit by having you on this committee.
Thank you.
Me?
Yep, go ahead.
This is Sarah Pierce, and she has 4 children. They live just over the line, so they open and roll into Mineral Point, and they have 2 in school here. She's just interested because her children are young and the future plans and what's going to happen and how that impact her family. She works for the Driftus Area Land Conservation Conservancy, and she does education, and she actually comes to school and works here with the kids, so she would experience what it's like in the classrooms there too.
Great, thank you.
This is Deb Ivy, Jesse's mom. Deb has a background in education, serving as an assistant principal and as a teacher, and then was our extension agent for quite a while, just retired from that. So she has experience in education, is a Mineral Point native, has been here a while, and has grandchildren in the district. So she's interested in providing a non-parent perspective to the committee.
Great, thank you. Come up front, Angela.
So this is Joni Martin, who I hadn't met before. Probably the only person, well, most of you others don't know. She is a retired special education teacher, so the word accessibility in the committee really popped out to her, and that was her biggest concern. She is a Mineral Point native. She grew up here, went to school here, initially taught here, and then she deserted us and went to Dodgeville and worked in Dodgeville for a while, and then moved back to Mineral Point when she retired 3 years ago.
Okay. That points to a wonderful relationship, so, yeah.
This is Angela Drain. She is president of the ParentTeacher Organization here. She has children in the building and from first-hand experience is interested in capacity and would also like to talk about the parking lot out there. How we safely pick up children and some of those other things.
Okay, thank you. Bridget.
This is Marta Farah. She's the early childhood pre-K teacher here. She wanted to get involved just because she has kids in the school district. And also next year she'll have one in pre-K and one in 5th grade, so kind of figuring out what that's going to look like and just to get more involved within the school and community.
This is Bridget Tippett, and she's a special ed assistant in our district. I have been fortunate enough to work with Bridget for the past couple of years. I've had her daughter in my class, which has been great. They actually open and enroll to our district and have 2 kids here. And Bridget wants to get involved just because she has kids here, and then also as a staff member here.
Great, thank you. Joelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
No, but I'll introduce, that's Luke Francois, and he is the superintendent of Mineral Point Schools. And he's been passionate about just improving things, as you know, but I think facilities overall has taken a center stage for a while now, so we're slowly making a journey with repairing the roof at the at the other building up there that finally got approved, and now we're focusing efforts down here, so it's exciting.
Thanks, this is Joelle Doy, our communications director. She's one of my 2 that have to be here, so they did get to 4, but thanks. And she's gonna be recording a lot of our minutes, much like a board meeting, for those that follow our board meetings, and gets the write-up and gets the video, you can go to certain segments of it. That's our hope here, is to be extremely transparent throughout this process. People can watch our work as we go through our journey together. And also, like I mentioned, you can catch up, so if there's some dates that you just cannot be here, I don't want you to lose out on some of the conversation and things that are happening, so you'll have a chance to stay connected, because the things are gonna come up. We're gonna be journeying together for the next 4 or 5 months, and it just may not be possible to make every meeting. So we want you to stay involved, and to that end, we'll make sure we take some good notes, send them out to you first. If everyone approves, then away we go, and we'll put those out, much like we do with some of our other board meetings. It is Bridget's birthday today, so I know she's going to be, so let's do it. Happy birthday, okay? Ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bridget. Happy birthday to you.
Thanks. We are missing one person.
Yes, we are.
Melissa
Ryberg, who's on the top of my list here.
Okay.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about Melissa.
She's my neighbor. She also dated one of my college roommates in high school. She's from Osseo, and just had a baby, and they have a Christmas party tonight. So she and her husband, Patrick's a surgeon at the hospital. They bought Ann Paulskill's house, actually, down the street. And I recruited Melissa, she also goes by Missy, because she wants to get involved and get to know people, and they are loving Mineral Point, but they're very, very new here, and very highly educated, different point of view, kids going to be in the district, not here yet, wanting to know people, make connections, really progressive, and would bring a different viewpoint to the committee.
Great. Super, we look forward to meeting Missy. So welcome everybody, and one of the questions the board asks is, can we continue to add people to the committee? And we had suggested that once we got to this point, the answer would probably be not. But if there is some real strong interest after this meeting, there's just somebody you know has to be on this committee, from what you can tell from the first night, we would consider that up through our first meeting. But at that point, we really want to close this committee down and do this work together and go on our journey together, so that we can learn together and be at the same place at the same time. They're welcome to join in virtually and or sit in on a meeting, but just not partake. This is really going to be the group's decision, and going forward, you're going to make a final recommendation. So let me talk a little bit about the agenda tonight and where this is going. So for tonight, I'm sorry I can't make this any bigger, but we'll just kind of walk through the board's charge, which is part of that welcome letter. Checking in, everyone receives the email, correct? Both the original invite, obviously Angie sent that out, and then the link to the board packet. Can you get into the board packet? I see a lot of heads, yes. Electronic, okay to send you stuff. If anybody prefer a mailed copy, let me know, I can send stuff out. But as you see, some of these reports are kind of large and lengthy, and to run the copies, we can do that. And just let me know, okay? So as we go through our agenda, we're going to talk about the charge that we've been given tonight, a little bit about the timeline and our journey together as we walk through this process. We're going to look a little bit at our current enrollment trends, what's been happening in our building over the past few years, and what we anticipate in the future. We're going to talk about some condition reports of our facilities. Roger Paulskill will be joining us around 7:15 to talk to us about the history of this building, some of the additions that have been on it, some of the recent capital maintenance that's been completed, some of the future capital maintenance that is scheduled, and we'll be able to answer some questions for us. Then I'm going to ask you a little bit about what kinds of pieces of information are you going to need to be successful on this journey as we start to walk through this process together. What things do you want to know more about? What kinds of things do you want to investigate? What kinds of things do you want to see? We're going to keep track of those and make sure that you have that information brought back to you somewhere along this process, so you're fully informed to make an informed decision or recommendation to the board. At some point, hopefully by the end of tonight or at the beginning of our next meeting, I'd like to elect a chair of this committee, and that's part of the board policies. In an ad hoc committee, there's a chair, and that chair is kind of a liaison between the board and this group. I will be with you side by side all the way through it, shoulder to shoulder, but essentially what you're going to do is report out some of the large takeaways from our meetings together. You might even, we'll end some of the agendas with what are some of the key points that you want to make sure the board understands where we are in our journey, and what are some key questions that we may need to guide some of our work from the board. We might have some things to ask the board about, you know, if we went this direction, would that be okay, or is that off the table? And then we can bring that back again. And so we want that committee's viewpoint to be shared to the board and from the board back again to our committee. So give that some thought to see if you're willing and able to serve in that capacity. And again, I won't leave you out there. We'll be working side by side to set kind of a discussion or agenda points for, and a lot of the points will be made in Joelle's notes. You'll have good talking points for the board to kind of summarize our meetings. So think about that. Either elect yourself or someone else. And then I'd like to finish today with, if we have the time, to go through a quick tour of the elementary building. A lot of times we see the building when kids are in it, so we have a sense of maybe how full it is, but we don't see all the other spaces that are in this building that I think are worth kind of noting. Places where we've put kids to try to educate them that are kind of off to the side, that may not be easily visible as you walk through the buildings. Some of the mechanical rooms and some of the challenges that we have behind the scenes. And all of that will, I think, help to drive some informed decisions as we go further along. I put in some additional resources. We'll take a little time to go through our facilities report, some of the surveys that we've done to date. This is really the wealth of information that we have up to date. This is some of the work that's happened over the past 5 years or so that has kind of got us to this point where we've talked about it a lot, but we've never really put anything into action. We've never really decided what we're going to do with capacity, for example. We've talked about moving the 5th grade out. That has come up at multiple times along the way, but the board has stopped just short of actually saying, let's just move the 5th grade. Because that's challenging. It presents some real logistical problems for us. Do we have the space up there? Yes or no? Question mark. And if we do that, what's that 5-8 configuration? Actually a 5-12 configuration. What does that look like? And so that study's a little bit deeper. And we may need to get into that study and actually see if that's a recommendation that goes forward. Some of this work is just around the mechanicals and some of the other places. We want to continue to maintain an old building, and is it worthwhile to put money into a building if we're only going to look at a longer-term solution of relocating to another building? Lots of different things that we'll get into. We're not going to get too far into the weeds tonight, but you'll see some of that past work that's going to bring us up to today's work. So let's go to the charge. This is really it, the charge, and I call it the ESPC for the Elementary School Planning Committee. So the ESPC's charge is to make a recommendation to the board for addressing elementary school capacity, and it should be accessibility, I believe, ASS, accessibility in schools. We hope that all kids can access it, but we want to make sure that it's accessible to them as well. The district also recommends that this be an advisory role, so we're not going to make the final decision. We've got to understand that the board is going to make a final decision, especially if it has a budgetary component to it. That absolutely has to be under authority of the board, as they're the elected representatives of our community. So we're going to form a recommendation, and I would suggest to you that we don't need to come to one recommendation only. Keep that in mind. We may say, if money's no object, we would prefer to do this, but if that's a problem for the board, then we would accept this. There could be multiple solutions here that could be potential recommendations going forward. There may be some things that we've studied it, and we just don't feel like we want to take that off the table, and that's not going to be part of our recommendation. So keep in mind, you don't have to come down to just one narrowed focus point. The district is asked for monthly progress reports, which is part of that chair, and I anticipate our work to conclude at the middle part of May, at the last board meeting in May. There will be, I'll get to a timeline, but roughly about a monthly meeting in between there, maybe twice a month, depending on what we decide as a group. One thing that I would note from the board is they did not take anything off of the table. In other words, they were given the opportunity to say, do you have any constraints? Do you have anything that we just, before we come to you with a final recommendation, you're just not going to accept right from the start? For instance, we would like to build a brand new elementary. And that was brought up explicitly, and the comment was made that if that's the final recommendation of this group, we would like to hear that. We would like to proceed going forward knowing that. So they did not take building a new elementary off of the table. In fact, they didn't take anything off of the table, which really means you have the full flexibility to think bold and broad and widely and think out of the box, come up with ideas that maybe we haven't even considered as a staff about how do we solve our capacity issues and how do we solve our aging building and bring it up into like newer learning spaces for kids. So that's really exciting, but it's also really scary because it would be nice to have that limited down where you don't have to consider that option, but you have to decide for the will of the group if that's a decision you want to continue to pursue or not. So that's your charge. What I will tell you is the charge is not for the administrative process to lead this. You'll not see Matt and I as the main focal point, other than maybe tonight to get our committee off the ground. But this is really a committee's effort. You are a representative of our community at large. There will be times where we're going to fold in the bigger community into this process, and I'll talk about that in the timeline, so you get some feedback from other stakeholders. But ultimately, you're going to drive this process, because what I've shared with the board is the final solution on what to do with this building and how to address our capacity. The one that's going to be most widely accepted is going to be the one that comes from the community. It's the one that they've investigated the problem, they've come up with the best solution given the circumstances, and I believe this is to be a very good representative group of where our community would be on a challenging topic like this. If it just comes from us, that doesn't necessarily reflect our community's will. So that's where we're going to start. Any questions as we get going on the timeline and or the charge? Okay, going back to, I think I just closed that up, but that's okay. Next is the timeline. I've taken a little bit of luxury to try to pre-map out, might be one extra there, that's okay, to pre-map out some dates and some times that I know will be places where we'll meet, and there's some other places where we have some flexibility. Everyone have one? Extra? Thank you. If we take a look at the timeline, let's go backwards to go forward. Back in November is the first time that the board started to discuss having a planning committee assembled and lead the direction and the charge of what are we going to do with our elementary building. And then into December, we were recruiting families, and we published it in the paper, and we put it out on our social media and our websites and so forth, and somehow that message reached you, which is great. Joelle is always interested to learn how you might have learned about the communication, whether it be word of mouth or other, but that always helps us to know where to best reach the community at large. Going into December, we had our last board meeting. That's when they gave us the charge, the parameters of our work, and they actually officially approved the membership of this committee. So you are an approved ad hoc committee of the board, or an extension, an arm of the board. And then this is the tentative timeline that's been made to date. Notice that as an ad hoc part or committee of the board, you are an official board-appointed committee, which means that you would have the same responsibilities that the school board has, which means that when we meet, we will have to post the meeting. And that it will be duly noticed in the community. Anybody that would like to observe can observe the meeting. It is a meeting that we're hosting in the public. The public can come and see it. But this isn't a public meeting. They can't come in and start to weigh in on our decisions and start to give us direction. So we will be posting these meetings publicly. Don't be worried about that. It's just part of the open records and meetings law that we have to abide by. So keep that in mind as we go forward as well. Here we are on December 21st, and we're in the tentative timeline. We're going to talk about enrollment. We're going to talk about some of our capacity issues. I put down there future residential developments and growth areas. When we get to capacity, I want to hear from you on that. And then what other information is needed is one of the ways we'll close tonight. As we go further then on into the future, our first board meeting after this is January 9th. If we have a chair ready and elected, I would like to bring somebody along with me to just share what we did tonight. Just a quick summary and overcap, and start to get that dialogue happening between the board and the committee.
That might be the 8th.
The 8th? Is that off by the 8th?
It's Tuesday.
That's a Tuesday, so it's going to be the 8th, thank you.
I'll edit it in the document.
Awesome. And then we can go ahead and share that too. I haven't shared this out, but we'll share it. I'm also starting a folder, a Google file folder that we can share with you to keep documents updated in as well. Then our next meeting that I have proposed is January 23rd or 24th. And the reason I picked those 2 days is I'm going to ask a design build firm that the board has approved. It's an architectural company out of Dubuque entitled FEH. They've worked with a lot of schools in this area. Cuba City, River Ridge are just a couple nearby. They're going to come back, and they are in the process of conducting a space needs report for our district. They're going to look at space capacity and report that out to you. And they're also going to look at our facility conditions and report that out to you as well. We have some of that past work, but you'll get a fresh update from the people that are doing the work most recently, and they'll report it out to you. Everything that happens starts in the committee, and then will get reproduced at a board meeting to follow. So you'll get the information before the board has it. You'll see these reports come out to you before the board has an opportunity to react and reflect. And that's intentional in that you're leading the process and giving the recommendation to the board, but we want to keep them in the loop and crisscross all the way through this process so that if we have questions, again, to drive our direction or give us some fences to work within, that we find that out earlier in the process rather than at the last minute in May and then have to redo a lot of the work that we've already done down the wrong track. As we move into then February,
12.
the 12th, are these all off by one?
That's what I'm wondering.
You did the 17th instead of the 18th.
Yeah, did you?
Oh, yeah,
do
there's
2017?
why. Thank you.
Oh.
Okay, there is a year change in there, isn't it? I'll be darned. My apologies, so the 12th is that board meeting. The 21st then is when, again, we'll come back with FEH, and it's gonna be a joint meeting again. And really, they're gonna ask you, okay, we can do anything you want. What options do you want us to study? Where do you want us to take this journey? You've gotten a little bit of information, we've done a little bit more. They'll start to then bring back some of that information for you in the form of, well, what would it look like if we remodeled this building? What would it look like if we put an addition on? What would it look like if we built a new school? How much would that potentially cost? Those kinds of things are going to be able to help guide that work along the way. Really premature right now, but down the road in February, we might be ready for it. And you can always adjust if not. As we get into March, that will be an opportunity for us to fold in some of, now we're starting to get some of our options on the table. We're starting to make some preliminary recommendations. It's a good time to open up the doors, let some community come in, give you some feedback on what they like, what they don't like, what they're thinking, and just use that to continue to inform your practice and your process as you go forward. We'll come back and we'll meet with the board again. So obviously the board meetings are not something this group needs to attend. I should have said that right up front. The Board of Education meetings, I will certainly be there with Matt to convey the group's work, but the chair would be somebody that I would ask, or even a co-chair, if you wanted to do it with somebody, and then either one of you could join for those meetings. And just give a quick, I'm thinking no more than 5-minute report out and take some questions and answers, so think about that. So you do not need to put the Board of Education meetings on your calendar unless you'd like to. As we go into April, we will then be ready to kind of give some preliminary designs and some options and some preliminary budgets around some things. So you can say, wow, I didn't know it was going to cost that much, maybe we need to back off that option, or that's really cheap, thinking of what we're going to get all of this, and maybe we want to keep moving down that road. So that's where numbers will start to come into the fold a little bit. And then as we get into May, we would actually run a survey of your final recommendations, get that larger community input across the entire community about what you're thinking to drive your final decisions. And then you would make your final recommendations to the board in May. So that timeline seems like a lot, but we do have, we're in December and we're taking it all the way out to May, so we've got time. But it will go fast, and we're going to have to at some point just make some decisions, and along the way you need to be my thermometer and say, this is moving too slow, we're ready for more, or this is too fast, and we just need to slow down so I can think some more. But we'll have those opportunities to check in with each other. On the backside, this really isn't for you, but let's say that a recommendation were to move towards some type of a referendum. If we were going to put on some modest or mild or modest renovation to this building, that's probably going to cost some dollars that we do not have in our operating budget, so it would most likely be a referendum question. If we're going to do a moderate or a large addition and or a new building, that's a pretty major construction project that would definitely need a referendum. So if we were to think about moving down a referendum path, your recommendation would go to the board in May. June, it would have a full month, and then in June they would come back and they would have time to deliberate that and decide if they want to move forward with a referendum or not. And if they did, in July they would finally draft a resolution that says we will go to referendum potentially as soon as November of 18. If that's the case, there's really two scenarios. If it's a moderate or mild renovation of this building, occupancy could be that following summer of 2019. If it's a pretty more extensive add-on and or new building addition, then it would probably be 2020 before we would have this process actually have occupancy with kids being able to use those new and vibrant spaces. So that's kind of a general timeline, and that's more for the board because your part will end in May. At that point, you may choose to get involved with the referendum committee or a yes vote or those kinds of things if you so choose, but really it's the board that needs to carry that part forward to decide if they're going to go to referendum, when that would be, and for how much, and all of those kinds of questions, which is good because you can release that control. You don't have to make those tough decisions. but you're certainly gonna be in a place to make your best recommendations. So, timeline, there's a couple things that can flex. I need some work with you on your calendars. First of all, the 23rd or 24th, and I wanna check to make sure it's not the 22nd or 23rd, but I'm pretty sure those dates are right. This is the date that FEH can meet with us to deliver those two reports, because they're working with multiple school districts, and in that window, if there's one day that doesn't work for a majority, or the other day does work for a majority, we wanna try to lock in on either one of those two. Is that a Wednesday, Thursday, if I'm recalling correctly?
That's a
Tuesday,
Wednesday.
Okay, so it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we'll figure that out. So, any of those days that you know you have a hard conflict, let's just start with, let's go Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. How many know they have a conflict on Tuesday of that week? Nobody. How about a Wednesday of that week? One. How about a Thursday of that week? One. Okay, so.
I think there was actually 2 on Wednesday, Bridget.
Oh, 2 on Wednesday?
As well.
2 Wednesdays?
Yes.
Okay. Good to know. All right, so we're gonna try for either that Tuesday or Thursday, just so we can get the largest majority if we can. I know we have some flexibility there. As we move down,
That was
January,
right?
correct. The next one, March 20th and 21st is actually a 2-day workshop. We wanna get as many people to come through from our community as possible to see our work to date and to give some suggestions and ideas. So they're planning to set up for 2 days to allow people to walk through. So if they have a conflict one day, they can come the next. Joel's already pointed out that the FFA banquet, I believe, is March 20th.
Well,
And
the
so that-
21st is ParentTeacher Conferences.
Okay, and in some ways, I'm thinking, really, of course there would be. But the other way is like, how could that not be better to get a ton of people coming into this building anyway? And as long as you're in parent-teacher conference, you got 15 minutes to kill, maybe you come over here and you check in and say, I really like this idea, or this just doesn't talk to me. So it might actually work out to be really beneficial, so thanks for the PT conferences and the FFA banquet. We'll work with those as we get a little bit further down the line.
And are those the 20th and 21st? Tuesday,
I'm
Wednesday?
gonna double check, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, I got about as much confidence as nothing right now, because I thought I had a
20th and
lot.
21st is Tuesday, Wednesday.
And you know that conferences are on
The 21st.
Wednesday.
21st Wednesday.
Did you say that this would be open during the day for people to come through too? Is that what you
Yeah,
told me?
for staff members to come through as well. So, that would give them a time in their free hour to come through and give some input to this as well.
And for those 2 dates, what would your expectation on members of the committee be?
We will talk as we get closer. I'll pin that down, but my expectation would be that a few of you will be available just to be able to answer questions about what was the committee's thinking about this, what were some of the discussions around this topic, why did you go with that choice versus this choice. So I wouldn't have the expectation that everybody be here all day, every day, but if we can get a few representatives across the board that did be or were able to be here through some shifts, that would be helpful just to kind of walk people through our thinking to that point. Looking forward to, there was one other place we had some flexibility. Survey results, you had mentioned, Joel, the 5-3 date was.
It's the middle high school band concert.
Right, middle school, high school band concert. How many are impacted by that?
Probably just me.
Okay, I've got a couple here, not 3.
Oh, I'm impacted because of the Thursday night.
Because of Thursday night, okay. That has a little flexibility in that that's when the survey is due, and we would compile a report and report it out. But we could move that survey to be done just a day or two earlier, and then we can move that around to make sure that we meet everybody's needs. So that Thursday might be problematic. That Wednesday, well, how many would have a conflict on Wednesday? One for sure. And that Tuesday, how many would have a conflict? Okay, so possibly a Tuesday or Wednesday. It's nice to get these on your calendar, and again, if things come up, we totally understand. The last piece I wanted to ask you, and we may not know this yet, I have not built in a possible tour of another elementary facility. And if along the process or the journey you feel it would be helpful to see what a new elementary construction looks like, or what newer spaces in an elementary looks like, that would be a tour that we could take. I know that there's a, Tom, you might know better, in Platteville, a pre-K 1 kind of a facility that just went online, I think in Platteville. There's another one in Dubuque that obviously not too far down the road that we could visit. We even have one of our meetings in Dubuque at a newer elementary and just kind of see some of those spaces and what new construction looks like. I won't try to persuade you, but I would say that elementary construction tends to be pretty much the same. A first grade room looks like a first grade room. When you get into middle school and high school, you start to see some different things coming in because of the unique needs of the courses and so forth. But if you feel like that's something you want to see and you're willing to travel and go see some new spaces, I'd be happy to set that up and coordinate that. So that's going to get to one of those things of what would you like to see along this way in order for you to make sure that you're feeling comfortable about the decision-making process. So keep that in mind. Any questions about the timeline? Okay. Then, okay, my last agenda way, do we move into enrollment? Yes, enrollment updates. Okay. So what has our enrollment been doing? While I'm passing this out, it's interesting to kind of be in this building during the school day. Thank you. We have roughly 358 kids. Does that sound right, Matt?
Yeah, it's
Just shy of 360
yeah.
right now in this building. So the question is that a lot? Is it not a lot? I would tell you that the rooms are, well, I'm going to let the principal talk for a little bit. How would you characterize the building on its capacity, the rooms, the hallways, the special ed spaces, so forth?
Limited would be probably the most fair word. The two of the three kindergarten classes are very nicely put. The pre-K classrooms are great. Nice spaces for independent centers, but it's, you have your third kindergarten classroom, which is considerably smaller. The special ed room used to be in one of the locker rooms. Moved them out to share the other half of the kindergarten room, which she shares with our math interventionists and our ELL coordinators. You have ELL coordinators not there very much, but we have two people in one room there. So it's just an older building that was built before you had all these services, before you had special education, before you had interventions. You didn't need, there was the need, but it didn't exist. So you built the school like that without a lot of storage and without a lot of smaller group areas to work in. So.
Do you know what the original capacity of the building was?
I was just asking Luke that, and I don't know. We're going to find out.
It's a good time to enter Roger. Roger is our Buildings and Grounds Facilities Coordinator for the district. I did ask that question of our FEH coordinator, and they'll come back with that answer.
Okay.
So I'll talk about that, but you may know what it was built for originally. You weren't here when they built it.
Were you here, Roger?
Me and Joni were in 7th grade.
7th grade, okay, so that dates you.
So it dates.
It was just built 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The actual capacity of this building at the time it was built, I can't really tell you for sure.
Okay. Why don't you just kind of give us a run through, before we look at enrollment, just talk to us about when the building was built, additions were built, some of the things that we've done recently for capital maintenance, some of the things that are upcoming that you know about, and then we'll get into some of the other pieces, the details later.
Okay. Well, the original building was built 1965 and 1966. So, Gail, you might not even been around then.
Sorry.
So the building's kind of aged. Like I said, me and Joni were in 7th grade, so that's how I remember that. The addition was added on in 1992. So, I mean, that's 20 plus years, or right around 20 years. That's been there a while.
And what is the addition?
The addition is where we're sitting right now. Here, what I've got, just take, excuse my penmanship when I send these around. These are our maps that we use for summer school and stuff like that. So we know where the kids are. This FEH told me that as they go forward, they're gonna actually do us a better map of this building. It won't be left.
65, 66.
So give you an idea, so you'll see where teachers are, what grades, where they are.
So these rooms are not to scale.
They're not to scale.
It's like we don't think about that.
Right, that's what it is. There you go, now you got it.
No, that's.
But if you look at it, you'll see where locations are. The original building, when that was built, the average room size back when they built this was between 812 and 850 square feet. That's the old part. The new part, the average room size for classroom size is right around 900 square feet. So 900 square feet is pretty much the standard, I think, the guy from FH, Kevin, said. So, but like this room here is, quite a bit bigger. But this was at the time it was built, this was a fully functional library. Jesse, you may remember the story pit that used to be over here in the corner.
I do.
So, but things have been remodeled in the years since. So, I mean, that gives you, they'd like to get an average, 900 square feet. I think the pre-K and early childhood upstairs is right at a little more than 900 square feet. And Morgan could probably answer that question. They're a little bigger than the average size rooms in this building. Things that we've done here in the district, basically these are in the last 6-7 years. We've replaced the roof. We replaced all the windows except for the new part. We have new univents in all the old building. With the AC possibilities, we put univents in that if we ever put a chiller system in, that we could put air conditioning in the building. We did building envelope work, which is tuck pointing and some of that kind of stuff, insulating. We finished, we're 99% done with asbestos removal in this building, so, which is pretty good. The stuff that's left is under the sinks. The sinks, when they put them in, they put insulation on the sinks. You can't break it off, tear it off, rip it off, so it's not really dangerous, but it is asbestos. So we do have some. Some of the cabinetry is still sitting on asbestos tile, which is very limited, but it's not a big issue because the kids can't get to it. So we're pretty much, and most of that's been since Luke's been here in the district, so we're doing pretty well with that. All those rooms that we've done with the asbestos, we have put new floor tile in. We do have an issue. It's not a structural issue as such. We've had engineers test it, but we do have a settling in the building. That have cracked some of the walls that we have fixed. Floor tile we have replaced. It's not a danger. So the engineer said structure of this building is very sound. So, but it's just something we did settle. We might want to address that. If we decide to keep the building, remodel it, add to it, we might address those issues at that point in time. We put computerized controls for our heating system in this building, so if we ever do go to the air conditioning, that'll tie right into that. We have started doing security work, cameras and such down here. We'd like to get a few more cameras, but we have started putting that in. Last year, we have done a complete replacement of all the outside lights on the building to LEDs, energy savings LEDs, from the old 1965 lights that were still here. We are working on the exit lights, emergency lights. This building does not have a generator, so we are putting in battery backup. They were battery backup, we're putting new battery backup LED lights, exit emergency lights. We hope to have that completed by the summer. Things besides that that's still needed, you'll get the thing from FEH, but upper parking lot is cracking. It needs to have something done with it, depending on what we do with building plans, what we're going to do with that parking lot. That would be the one to the north up here. The one to the south, the playground, that's in pretty good shape. Water heater is a 1965-66 water heater. It needs to, it's paid its dues. It's put new energy efficient water heaters in. I mean, we pay for it in 5 years or less going with that water heater. We do have some sidewalk work. We do have, depending on what we do with the old part of the building, the classrooms, because computers, back when this building was built, you might have had a film projector, you might have had an adding machine or something, but that was all the electric you had back then. So these rooms definitely weren't designed for having 6, 8, 10, 12 computers in them and that kind of stuff. So we have been doing some rooms, putting more outlets in them over the last couple of years, but that's something we would have to look at. And like I said, and we do have some sidewalk work.
Does that include the stairs?
It includes stairs out front.
So the front stairs coming down needs to be updated?
Updated, replaced. I mean, and some of that is dependent upon what this community does or what the community does with your work. If we change entrances to the building, that might change out there. The entrance might be in this part, the entrance might be in this part. These things have all been talked about. So I mean, we've done quite a bit in the last 5 years, 6 years. Anybody that was here before that sees the work. There's still a lot of work to do, but
we'll talk about that in just a little bit because there's some pretty big projects that are left to do that haven't been bid off because they're just so large and so costly. that it would probably better be folded into a discussion about, before we put that type of dollars into this building, we better make sure we're gonna be here in 10 or 20 years. And if we're gonna, we'll talk about that, I don't wanna get too far off. Capacity, here's what I know. First of all, is my first observation when I came into this building 7 years ago was these spaces are really tight. The classrooms just felt a little bit narrower than what I was used to in my previous district. I think some of our smaller classrooms are about 750 square feet, would probably be some of our smaller spaces. The industry standard for a typical classroom, grades 2 through 5, would be probably 900 square feet. So roughly 750 to 850 square feet are what our current classrooms are. Pre-K and EC are typically built bigger, 11 to 1,200 square feet, and I think we're doing okay with those spaces. But in a new construction, you would probably not put those spaces on the second floor. You'd have your early childhood and kindergarten kids coming right in off the door into the classroom and right back out again, rather than transversing stairs up and down and so forth. The question that came up, I think, is a great question, because it's the one I had as well, is, and I think the answer to this will come out, is what is the capacity of this building right now? Because we know we have roughly 360 kids in it, but what was it built for? And I think the first edition, because the classrooms were smaller, is already telling that when it was built in 65, 66, the standards for what a class size was in 65 and 66 was already updated in 92, 93, because they built the next sets of classrooms at, I think you said, more like 900 versus the old 850 or 800s. So they already realized that kids need more space in 92, 93. That 900 has still been the industry standard, so that has carried forward. But to that point, I couldn't tell you what our current capacity is, but that is the study that FEH was going to try to get for us tonight, but we'll definitely have for our next meeting, is given the spaces that we have, these are how many kids you should be able to comfortably fit. And then given that, here's how many kids that you currently have, and here's what the national standard would say for a number of those kids, how many square feet you should have. So we can walk through that process, and I think that'll be helpful for us to have a better understanding as we go forward. With regards to enrollment, that's the sheet that I just handed out. A little bit of a guide on the bottom here, starting in 2007, our enrollment all the way to 2017. And you know, you can look at the observations, but I would consider this relatively flat. Over a 10-year period, from 353 to 358 is not a lot of change. Our biggest year to date, I think, was 2014. Thank you, 375, 2014. Somebody, I gave away my top, there you have it. So I put my little math X bar, what's that? That's the class average. So go ahead and just share the class average. What's the range there?
Well, it's 37 looks like the high and 44 is the low.
Yeah, so class averages across all grade levels have pretty much been 45, 46, 45, 46. The high spike, 47 in 2014, was the highest average class size we've had. And that's, again, all three classes. So we're a three-section school. We're built for 3 first grades, second grades, third grades, fourth grades, fifth grades. Should check if it was built that way. I assume it was built with 3.
That's
Two
what I was
fifth
gonna
grades.
ask, is that, you know, if the size of the classrooms has changed over time, what has the class size changed over time? Because in
Yeah,
the 80s, maybe it was okay to have 30 kids in a class.
right.
And now, you know, that might have changed over time as well.
And you'll also see when you go on our tour, there was some, what I would call collapsible walls, accordion walls that could move forward. You could have a larger space and then break it off into 2 smaller spaces, which weren't either one of them really built to be full-size classrooms. So that's kind of a unique piece to the building. Some of those walls have been replaced with permanent walls. Some still stay portable. So a good question. We'll investigate all of those pieces as well, because it has shifted.
And I think the school had 2 fifth grades because they were right up here where the 3rd grade is now. And there was a time where you only had 2 fifth grade sections, and there were bigger kids' bodies in that space, so they were bigger rooms. They were on the addition.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have the 5th graders down on the other end.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep
It
in
is
mind
something
as
to
well
keep
as
in
they
mind.
grow in size.
Mm-hmm. And they're probably in some of our smaller classrooms in the building. So it's something to keep in mind. The other green and yellows, that's worth noting. The first is the green line in the bottom, students with disabilities, SWD. That population has been declining slightly. We're roughly at the elementary, just a little bit above 10% this year. of students with disabilities. Economically disadvantaged students has been growing over time, a little bit of up and down in the last few years, but that's the yellow line, economically disadvantaged. And down at the bottom is our English language learner line. So we have just introduced English language learners in 2012. Prior to that, or at least in my history, there was no English language learners, and we're seeing a few kids that are starting to move into the district that have those needs. So that kind of gives you a snapshot of our enrollment and trends. So the question that I had asked Mike Wagner today is, hey, I know the answer to this, but I just have to ask for this meeting tonight. Any proposed growth in this area, any proposed future subdivisions or anything coming online? He's like, nope, not a nil, nothing. And so if you know of anything that's growing other than maybe a house being built on 39 or something like that,
Do you think
let
there'll
me
be
know.
any future enrollment in or movement into the district with the addition of Vortec in Barneville?
Good question. And that came online this year, right?
I don't think they're online
They
yet.
aren't
They're
online
just
yet.
moving into
Okay.
that building, I believe.
And I think really it comes down to, and this is a place you can help me as well, is it starts with available housing to move
Barneville
in.
has none,
And Barneville has none.
has none and they're not building.
Okay, so then they're gonna start moving down the road one way or the other toward Mount Horeb or toward Dodgeville. I didn't check to see how many for sale signs we have across.
There's only 13
There's not
houses for
many
sale in
houses for sale right
Dodgeville.
now.
Okay.
In Mineral
In
Point.
I
Dodgeville.
just talked to a realtor
Okay,
yesterday.
so there is no, there's really, it's a housing shortage, whether it be in Barneville, Dodgeville, or Mineral Point. So that's good to know. And there's nothing coming online for, putting up a subdivision to bring capacity to our area. So I don't see an additional growth through residents in our district. So then it brings up, well, possibly through open enrollment, but then they're still open enrolling from somewhere where there's no houses. So I don't know how that plays out. If anybody's got any inside scoop on any of this, that's why I wanted to put it out to the masses. I'm not aware of any kind of real growth.
There was talk about the behind Selah, behind Crawford's, that got sold. Has anybody, I don't know what's going on
The
there.
people
I
who
heard it
bought
was a
properties
relative of
bought
Selah.
that.
They bought it and so they'll keep it the way it is.
As far as,
Yeah.
We were just,
so they sold it together.
sorry, Sarah, we were just talking to Goodweiler's. There was talk, because I think Goodweiler's is looking into selling, but that hasn't been approved either, has it?
I'm not sure what happened there.
No,
They're not building
I
a
don't-
health center anyway. or
He
whatever
took-
was gonna- Right.
he got 6 acres changed to commercial, but there's nothing been done for that.
Safe to
And that was
say,
just zoning, nothing's happened.
Right.
yeah, safe to say 30 houses aren't coming online in the next 3 years. There's not anything in the queue that's in the front of the city hall that they need to act on to approve a massive subdivision to come in with water and sewer and all those kinds of things. So from that, I can deduct that we're gonna stay relatively flat. Based on our last 10-year trend and projecting forward with what we know in our grade levels right now today, rolling up, is I don't see a big fluctuation up, but I don't see a big drop down. However, here comes the open enrollment piece, which I have shared with you as well. I'm gonna trade you, because I gave you my number copy, you can have that back when I'm done. So the green line is our open enrollment in, the blue line is the net, and the red line is the open enrollment out. So let me just kind of give you, I don't know if I have this, I don't have this one up, I should have put it up. So back in 2010, I think that's the first year, if you want to put some numbers on the top, in 2010, above the green line, there was 25 students that were open enrolling into Mineral Point from some other community in the area. Now this is district-wide, not just the elementary, I don't have it broken down by elementary. The red line at the bottom, there were 31 students that were open enrolling out. So that is a net of -6, which is why that blue line is underneath the 0. We had 6 more kids open enrolling out than we had in. So if we go to the middle, let's go to 2013, where we start to see a little bit of change. The green line, we then had 36 in 2013, right in the middle. Green line is 36, open enrolled in above the green line. The red line at the bottom, -43. 43 students open enrolling out, which is a net for the blue of -7. So our net was staying pretty much the same. Even though we had more kids coming in, we had more kids going out. Then we get into the last, all the way to the right, 2016, which was a year prior to last. The green line, 61 kids open enrolling in, -48 open enrolling out. And for the red, which is a net of +13, which is why it moves up above the 0 line there.
What can you attribute to the open enrollment in?
So we did some studies, and Joel, I'm gonna kick it over to you, because you were
The
not part of that.
first thing they said was better teachers. I don't know what better teachers means, but it means we have great staff, so that's great. The second thing was better communication, which I was glad to see. And I don't remember the rest, to be honest. Those were pretty significantly
So
up there.
those were more important to people than just like they worked here and they brought their kids here,
So
or was it
those,
just a convenience factor?
there is a lot of that. Or they work in Dodgeville and they take their kid there, that's why they so the open enrolled out, it wasn't that was where we saw the convenience factor.
I
was-
work in Dodgeville. it's
I work in
easier to-
Dodgeville, I'm taking my kid there kind of thing, so.
Just for fun, the third Friday count in September is 2017, so we do have this year's data, it's just not put up publicly on the DPI website, but I'll give you those numbers, because I think it's a little bit of a time when we're talking about trends. So I'm gonna start at the top, we left with 61, if you were to take that out one more year, 85. So the bottom red line would be negative 43, and that gives you a plus 42 as a net.
But the funding that we get for those students is, we are not gonna see this year because it's the past.
Correct.
It's a
And-
trend,
It's
it's
a trend.
just through the
And you
years.
also don't see the full
Right.
dollar amount.
Right, I
Right.
saw that, we don't see the full.
Right.
And do you know how much this is impacting the elementary? Like,
That I
you
do not,
okay.
but that would be one question, it's like, what would you like to know when we come back, I will dig that up. You're gonna capture that for me, right, Joel? Thanks.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I haven't like asked. I'd like to know the enrollment from 96 to 2006 as well.
Okay, the 10 years prior?
Please.
Sure. Thanks. So, what I'm seeing is that our resident students, when they leave the area, are not coming back. They're going to the suburbs or other. What's backfilling those kids leaving from our district is the open enrollment in that continues to increase. So as our students that reside in Mineral Point go off to school or work or military and are not returning home, we would normally be dropping pretty significantly with declining enrollment if it hadn't been for the influx of open enrollment kids coming in to fill those seats.
And those, just to add, we've had to decline, I think, a few.
That is right, yeah, so we have a few classes where we're just across the board full. We just don't have a seat available. Our 7th grade class was up to 63 students across 3 grade levels. We had to actually kind of create another section of some language arts and math to just get all the kids to be able to fit into their schedule, a course during the school day somewhere. Brought in some extra staffing, and that was just with the kids we had. So we had to say no to anybody open enrolling into 7th grade. We've done it in a couple other grades as well.
That would be 8th grade.
It's
isn't it?
8th grade,
8th
yeah.
grade, yes,
Because that's,
thank you.
yeah.
Yep. The other place is with kids that have disabilities. We have not been able to take any students that have a disability because our special education caseloads are simply full at this time. Yeah.
And how many kids are in the district?
There are, the only reason I'm pausing is because I want to say, because I get it confused with district residents and then I get it with open enrollment in. So there's a difference between butts and seats and what we get funded for, which is our
Right.
FTE.
Yeah.
I think it's 750, 748.
I thought the butts and seats was 714,
That sounds about right.
That would sound
but
about
I
right.
don't know.
It'll be, if you did a quick search, I know you can come up with it before the end of our
If you're in
meeting.
42 net, that would be about right.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be about right.
And does that follow the same trajectory of what you're looking at and what you're thinking where we're gonna be?
Yeah, so if you're talking about just resident students, and I'll bring in just residents, because that's a pretty telling story, it's declining every year, down about 7 to 10 students, 7, 11, 15, then it kind of flattens out a little bit, but there's definitely a decline of residents, which is, if you just roughly think about $10,000 per student for a resident student being funded from the state, half of it's property taxes and the other half is from state aid. The open enrollment kids are only worth a value of about $7,000. So there's a significant decrease there to educate a kid fully. So in those numbers, obviously, the nets have been growing, but not, so when we lose the 10,000 and gain back 7,000 and stay relatively flat overall for enrollment, we're actually losing revenue and trying to do more with less, if that makes any sense.
I think you've kind of answered but with where you think that we're headed, of people who are in their fertile age and having kids and our reproduction rates in the district, that is where you're thinking we're also going to be decreasing. I mean, we're not adding additional houses, we know that, but man, there are a lot of people having kids right now, and I would hope to think that we have an increase, but maybe, I mean, those census, I don't know what the census tells us, or the health department,
Yeah.
is there any of that to tell us how many 2-year-olds there are in Interpoint, or?
Yeah. Did you want to jump in, Deb, before I?
I was just gonna follow up with her, Courtney and Morgan and some of the young ones sitting around the table here. I see more kids, Mineral Point kids coming back to town and having their families.
I agree.
And I don't know that it's
It's
enough,
totally-
but
yeah.
it's happening more than it used to.
And they're leaving, and they might be getting a job somewhere, and then they're coming back. Like
And driving.
Tanner and Bree
And
Carroll
they're
just
commuting.
moved back, and now they're having their second kid. They weren't here for a while, now they're back here.
Yeah.
Actually, people that are having kids are having less kids per family.
I had 3 more than you, so.
Maybe he's not done.
Maybe he's.
You know, Jesse, the other point is though about asking how many families there are with 2-year-olds. That population of, when families have kids less than 4, and, you know, if they're 4 years old or younger, they're more likely to move because they're not involved in schools yet, and that's a really hard, it's hard to use that age as a predictor of future enrollment, because you're less likely, unless you're to the community and are really tied to it, until your kids enroll in school, you're more likely to move. I mean, that's a hard
Yeah.
thing to use in terms of predicting.
It
We
would
have to also be
give,
looking
instead of
at-
a shot in the dark, it would give us some sort
Right,
of
oh, yeah.
idea, but.
Yeah.
But do you feel that there's 4 to 5 babies being born every year in Mineral Point?
No, I would have no idea.
Because that's what we'd be looking at to keep figures the same, and yet, and if those of us who have kids who are moving up don't move out to let the families who are gonna be having children move in, then ultimately, there's no answer.
I think that's what I would wonder about, with looking at, housing, not having any housing starts happening in the district. Is there any way to look at the demographics of homeownership in the town?
There is. To that point, you have to look at when does the population turn over?
Yeah.
You know,
That's what I mean,
the senior citizens are replaced with new families that are coming in with young children, and,
Yep.
and where are we in that census? That is something that can be done. There's two people that I'm aware of. The Applied Population Lab out of UW-Madison does this work, so we could get an APL report done for us, and they can look at trends. And they look at multiple ways to look at a brief history is you can just simply look at a roll-up. Take on average how many pre-K kids come in, and just pretend you have that average going forward, and take what you have and just keep rolling them up for a year, and you kind of get your 5-year trend. After 5 to 10 years, it gets kind of a little tricky because there's a lot of variables in that. The other way is you look at 3-year averages for cohort groups, K3, 3-5, 5-8, and 9-12, and then you take those averages and roll them up, or you can do a 5-year cohort. APL takes a lot of different variables and kind of spins them, so they're a little bit more in depth, but they do look at census, they do look at birth rates for this area, they look at a little bit more of the other things that wouldn't normally get picked up in a population study. So one of the things I'm hearing, it would be helpful to have an accurate or a somewhat of a vetted population prediction model. Not just what we're subjectively thinking, but you'll really look at people that do this for communities and for schools and project out to come in and do a study here.
You know, I think
The other thing
No, you're next.
think to go farther back, people are moving here sometimes because of a job, is the community wooing or recruiting or hearing of anything moving into the industrial park? Is the hospital expanding? Is Land's End expanding? Is, people are willing to drive 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes an hour and 15 minutes outside of Mineral Point. Is there any job growth?
And the hospital is growing. They've got an addition and they've got a 20-year plan.
Okay.
So that's already in the works and happening.
Okay. The only thing I can share that would be my subjective ad would be that when I talk to families that come from out of the area that are not natives relocating, they're coming from the Chicago suburbs or they're coming from another state, they're looking at websites, they're looking at academics, and they're looking at Mineral Point. That is definitely an indicator that they have chosen this district for a reason, but that doesn't put any more houses on our land. It doesn't put any more opportunities, and what I've found is that it's really hard, A, to rent, even in transition, and B, is a lot of the homes are historic with some pretty significant covenances, and they're not great for starter families. And there are no new subdivisions or starter homes out there that are kind of the middle priced income to come into to kind of start a family in. So, that's some questions that would behoove the entire community to talk about a plan for that. But we're here to look out at, I would say, the next 5 to 10 years is probably our projection. Where do we want to be in the short, mid, short-term range and where we want to be long-term. So when we make decisions, that we should be good for the next 10 years. I don't know if we can really predict beyond that, but we want to keep that longer vision in mind. Anything else before we move on from capacity? Yeah, maybe.
Well,
I'm sorry, Sarah.
it just seems to me that, you know, the enrollment for Mineral Point residents is one thing, but then the open enrollment is another thing. Because if you look at these numbers and how they balance out, just from last year to this year, we're from 13 up to 42.
Yeah.
And so how can you make an idea about a trend when you have that big of a jump? And, you know, is this a good thing that we have 42?
Yes.
Or is it, you know, but how do we, you know, how do we sell that to the community, saying, okay, how are we gonna grow our school, but we don't have necessarily the history of like a long-term trend to show that. So it's a little bit deceiving to see where the numbers are coming from.
Yeah.
What's the typical overcrowding in a building? I mean, I would think that at most schools, there's overcrowding. Is there there's standards in, so I'm a farm background person, so Freesdale Barn has a standard overcrowding percentage that you aim for, so that's my comparison point.
There's probably a formula that would say there's so many kids per square feet that should be in a room or in a building. And even I've seen some studies where and the building should have so many acres to be sitting on to give it capacity for playgrounds and parking and so forth. FEH will be very instrumental in helping us work through some of those questions because those are technical and they're embedded in a lot of research and studies. So we'll make sure that we add those questions to the queue. What I would say is that when we have kids that are being serviced in hallways and there's not meeting spaces for confidential meetings that take place and kids are working out of what used to be shower rooms for occupational therapy or speech and language locations, I would say we're beyond that threshold of what that buffer is. And I think there's also two types of capacity. There's actual capacity, which we have all the kids come in, we educate them and we send them home and things are fine. Nobody got hurt today, I hope, right? No? Okay, good. But then I think there's a different capacity. I would just define it as functional capacity. Like, where is your optimal function at?
Well, that's when you go to that overcrowding number, where like there's a sweet spot of where you want to overcrowd to and you don't want to get beyond.
And I think we're beyond that sweet spot, but where can we, you know, how much capacity do we have to build in to get back into that sweet spot without overdoing it because we don't know our long term. I mean, it would be very different if we knew we had 2 subdivisions coming online with 30 and 50 homes each, and we can build for that. We don't know if we're going to start declining significantly, and the last thing you want to do is put a big addition on, and then it sits empty, because that's not good. But at the same time, you don't want to do nothing and stay at this uncomfortable threshold for a decade, wishing we would have just done something to renovate or move around.
Now, what about class size? If we did something that created larger classrooms, would the class size go up, which would then almost reduce the number of classrooms that we perhaps need? Because some of the grades only have like 45 or something in them, so.
Yeah, and that is something that Matt and I talked about, is that if we're in that 42 to 45 range, it's either 3 classes of 15, which are kind of small, or you're getting in a class of 22 and 23, which is kind of large for the typical threshold for what Mineral Point has wanted. Mineral Point has traditionally, in my experience in the last 7 years, valued smaller class sizes. That's part of why they moved here and want to be part of these schools. So we're going to honor that. To what point, though, is small? Because if you looked at 22 to 23 compared to some of the other schools 45 miles down the road one way or the other, that's a pretty good class size. There's a lot of 29s and 30s that would really love a 23 and 24. So sometimes it's relative. But with that said, we have to decide what's best for us. And we might need to look at and one of the recommendations we would make to the board in January is typically we've had in the pre-K 1 around a 1 to 15 ratio. We might bump that up to 1 to 18 if we keep seeing these classes of 42s. It might make a little more sense to inch that up a little bit if we're going to start going with some 2-section groups all the way through rather than 3-section groups all the way through. But we need that flexibility and policy to at least give us the opportunity to look at that as a scenario. So you get to weigh in on that. I'm comfortable with 18 in a class at pre-K and 1 and 2, and not so much, you know, it doesn't maybe matter as much in 3, 4, 5, or maybe it does. So that's where we're not going to really get into the policy on class size, but one of the questions you might have for the board that you want some clarity on is, Do you maintain or hold that the class size should stay at 15 in pre-K 1 and 2? Because we're going to design very differently than if it's going to go to maybe 18. That's actually a question they're going to wrestle with in January, so you'll get some clarity around that in February and March about what the board's thinking around class size going forward.
I do know that before the current 8th grade went through, Morgan, you probably remember this, is I want to say the 4th and 5th grade were 2 sections. And then as that current 8th grade went in, that was when they started adding the extra teachers.
Yeah.
And a big problem with dropping some of the other ones back to 2 was not so much the number of kids, but the classroom size.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't want to have 24 kids in the classroom of that size. So that's why I just wonder what the board's plan would be, is if we went back to bigger classrooms for those older grade levels, would that impact class size?
And the board's been split on this issue too, in that we added a teacher to create a 3rd section all the way through with this big bubble class that went through. And then the thought was we would then pull that teacher back out. That never happened. And then the thought was, well, that teacher will just follow that bubble group all the way up. Well, that wasn't really practical for a lot of reasons as well. So part of it became the value of small class sizes. And we want that not just this year for just the 8th graders, we want it for all of our kids. And so the board has held that line where we've added staff back into a 3-section model in almost every grade. I think every grade now, other than maybe pre-K and EC.
Pre-K
No, we
is
have
3.
three.
You have 3, okay. So yeah, we're back to 3 sections, and that wasn't the way it was 7 years ago. There's a couple classrooms that only had 2. Anything you'd add, Matt?
Just 2 things. One is, regarding class size, we're learning more and more about the effectiveness of class size, and coming from a school that had a high level of needs with kids, we were around 70% pre-reduced. That was more, I felt it was more important to have small class sizes because some kids were coming in with their basic needs not being met. They had dinner the previous night, they were homeless. And so a teacher, we're gonna have to invest more energy into some of these kids. Class size is smaller, does help. We're on the opposite end of the spectrum here. We're maybe 30% pre-reduced. So more kids need to be met, which just allows the teacher to teach and not have to address some. We still have needs for sure here, but that's my belief is class size is also dependent on the needs of the kids. But we're also talking about academic innovation and independence and a strategic plan, and that's the second thing is, do we relook at what it needs to be in a grade? You know, and because you spent 9 months in 1st grade, does that make you a 2nd grader? You know, or are you more proficient in math and maybe literacy? How do we better address those needs and kind of think beyond just a grade level, or this is my teacher? It's a lot to think about, but it's kind of where I think education's heading in the 21st century is beyond the traditional approach.
So, for instance, like flexible learning spaces?
Right.
Just, okay,
Yeah.
so that it can morph to anything, this table can go here, I'm making it up, a wall, a movable wall can come
Yep.
there,
Right
a
on.
little bookcase can go here.
Yeah.
We've started to purchase some furniture in the building, hallways and classrooms. That kind of will show, when we do the tour, I can show you some examples of that. We're trying to think smarter about our spaces, even in some of the smaller classrooms.
Yeah, that's a good segue into just some of the resources that are loaded up into Board Book. We won't have time to get into these tonight, but I want to redirect you to some of the things that are inside of our Board Book packet, so you can go in and really take this next month and dig down deep into some of these areas, because I think the wealth of information will be helpful to give you some background and context about what we're talking about. This first one was a survey that was done just recently with our elementary staff, and they were suggesting that the most urgent needs that are as followed. This is a staff of 30 in this building, so that would be all 30 certified teachers weighing in on this. 18 said just regular education classroom space, just feeling like their space for the regular ed is tight. The next biggest one is the flexible learning spaces, much like you were just suggesting, is it's not necessarily about walls, it's about traditional furniture and rows that can't be moved around and flexible in different heights, and the mobility to have a collaboration group over here on computers while we're doing silent reading over there, and those kinds of flexible spacings was almost equal with the wall space. The third that came in was special education spaces for OT, PT, speech and language, those types of needs. This one here is number 7, space for community. There's no community space for you to come in. We think about the grandparent program, the Veterans Day program in our small gymnasium, how that also has to double up as the cafeteria during the day. There's no space for community to come in to have meetings or do aerobics or those kinds of things. There's only one gym that's not a full court, so it's not really a true basketball court for the youth basketball programs, and those kinds of things all kind of came into that piece as well. A lot of other votes for just some other things that have concerns, but that's one report that you can take a look at. This report was really one of the very first surveys that were done. The elementary's up at the top, and it was just kind of hey, give me some comments about what are you seeing in your spaces. This was probably 4 years ago now. Like to have more power outlets, need more outlets, there's cracks in the wall, more shelving would be nice, there's some older parts of the building that are showing their wear. I've got a very small room, it's quite conducive for my needs, but in the summer, really warm and very uncomfortable. The windows allow a great amount of natural light. Need more outlets for charging technology. Be helpful if we could do some things with lighting in the buildings. There's some traditional lighting in here. This one is about a set of blinds that are not working and kind of hard to set up and set down. So you can go through some of those comments. The next report, based on those comments, we hired a firm called Nexus. Nexus is out of the Madison area. They came through and did a comprehensive study of the elementary, middle, and high school buildings, and then kind of looked at it from a district snapshot. This report starts with just the hardscapes around the outside, looking at that parking lot next to the ball diamond, looking at the upper parking lot that talks about the concrete replacement and asphalt and so forth. But then it really starts to get into, I'll just kind of slip through here quickly and get to some of the other pictures. Here we start to get into what we call deferred maintenance with some kitchen needs. If you look through this report, it really goes almost space by space. This is the heating and cooling area. Looking at an older, this isn't the boiler yet, is it? That's the HVAC, but our boilers are from probably 50-year-old boilers.
In this building?
Yeah.
Actually, the boilers in this building were put in 92.
92, so that came with that new addition. Okay. So as you go through here, the water systems, the hot water heater, you'll see some of these pieces as well. Toward the end, which the piping, that's maybe something we should just talk about quickly. All original piping in here, galvanized piping, which probably needs to be replaced. We'll spend some time going through this a little bit more in depth, but at the end, which as my arm falls off here, is some recommendations. I'm going to stop there, but you can see clock systems and bell systems and all of these different things that we no longer get parts for because they stopped making the PA system in 1966. And so we haven't been able to replace it, and we've got patch cords and those kinds of things. So just some outdated equipment. We'll see that stuff on a tour. We'll talk about some of these things. Toward the end of that facility is some recommendations on how to possibly reconfigure this existing space to be a little bit better flowing. Maybe put an addition out and relocate the parking and or the bus drop-off. And so there's a study in there that shows how that might look. There's also a proposal that if you wanted to build a new elementary, they didn't do any work on it, but roughly for the size of the school that we have, the elementary kids that we have, it's roughly, I think it was I want to say it was it's called a $20 million building is what a new elementary would be for this current size. So if you wanted to know that number of communities asking, well, what would it take to build a new elementary, it's roughly 20 million. And that's without really any design and location and buying land and or is it here or there, those kinds of things. That study's there. The next one is another survey. This followed the report. Then we came back and we asked the community to come in at large. And we had about 12 people that came and showed up for a community event on our elementary building. What do we want to do with the future? But the survey went out and there were 100 respondents to this survey. And I think that has some validity to it. It's not just the staff members. This really went out to more people. And what I found in the 4 or 5 questions around elementary, deferred maintenance, from I would champion this down to I'm really opposed to doing anything around deferred maintenance, which is your parking lots, your ball fields, your kitchen area, so forth. If you look at the average down here, 3.53 is out of a total of 5, I believe. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So if it's out of 5, 2.5 is kind of the middle ground. 3.5 is definitely moving toward the I agree with that idea. So that's deferred maintenance. Next question, these won't take long, is on facility plans on environmental systems, heating and cooling, air conditioning, replacing old exhaust fans and plumbing and so forth. 3.71 was the response rate from 100 people responding to that. Third question was on electrical lighting, interior upgrades, adding outlets for the rooms and so forth, and bringing all of our power up to speed with a standby generator should the power go out. 3.56. Question 4 is on safety, security upgrades, fire alarms, PAs, bell systems, clock replacement, so forth. 3.59. And then this is the last one, which is a remodel upgrade, changing the entrance, the parking lot, the flow, moving pre-K, K1 downstairs toward the entrance, finding some new spaces for the special needs students, so forth. 3.47. Then it goes into the middle school, high school report, but you also get a wealth of comments of what people were thinking about that. So it really gives you some background and context about, as we ran these things kind of up the flagpole a couple times, what people were thinking, how they were weighing in on it, and what were some of the comments around that. So please go through those different pieces as well. I think we talked about this one. Yeah, we already talked about that one. So let's pause there for tonight, because you've got now a homework assignment, which is to kind of get into those reports if you haven't already. Maybe now that you have the context of what those reports and surveys have, get a little deeper into them and try to understand a little more about what's been done to date, so that when we come back together, we're going to, first of all, answer your questions, get a little bit deeper into our facilities report. We will put a tour together of this building, and so you get a chance to see some of the spaces where they've given some of these condition reports out. And then we'll also be meeting with FEH at our next meeting as we get back together, and they will share out some of what they saw from an expert's perspective as they walked through the building and did some both capacity analysis, and they'll be able to answer our questions around what capacity should be, and then some of those accessibility reports and where some places are that just need to be updated, because there are a lot of places, what I'm hearing already without having the report in hand, is that's not up to code any longer. And even though it was built that way and was to code at that time, it cannot be left this way. It has to be addressed. So what are those things that have to be done, should be done, and would be nice to be done, and then all the other things on top of that. So you'll get that next meeting as well.
Can I add one more
Absolutely.
assignment to the homework? It's just a short article that was in the Washington Post yesterday. It's just reported about Google studied their employees and what the best teams, why they were successful, and they thought they were going to get, these are the smartest people with computer programming and whatever. They found out that it's a lot of the, what they call soft skills, what making people successful at Google. So being a good coach, communicating and listening well, possessing insights into others, empathy, supporting one's colleagues, being a critical thinker, problem solver, being able to make connections across complex ideas. So that goes to the kind of the idea of 21st century learning and our kids' futures. And so I think it might give you some context just beyond the pipes and the boilers and all that stuff, and designing a building around the kids. And so what kind of a building will produce that kind of a kid when they leave here. So I'll just pass that out.
Thank you. Good point.
I had a question that was sort of in line with that a little bit, for the future, and probably Matt, you'll be able to answer this. And that is, like what age groups, if we're talking about moving the fifth graders and doing all these things, like in school environments, what are good age groups to have together? And then also, I guess when you talk about creative learning in like larger classrooms, what that looks like, or what the quantitative values of that are? Is it student-teacher ratio? Is it those kind of things? Or what kind of pedagogical elements are like kind of informing like what those groups are?
There's an educational scientist named John Hattie, and I'm sure he knows who he is. He's studied this. He studied analyses. He's like smushed them together, and he has a number. I can bring that next time.
Yeah, let's add, Joel, if you capture the question, let's add John Hattie's work to the list.
If you Google John Hattie, you'll see.
H-A-T-T-Y.
He updates his numbers about every 2 years.
Did a meta-study, which is basically a study of all the studies that have ever been done over a decade longitudinally, and then can rank them based on how many standard deviations away from the norm that it has on effective student achievement. And it's amazing, some of the pedagogies you would think have a large impact, really have a very small impact on the actual academic learning of a child. but some things you wouldn't have put up on top, really, yeah, it's a good one for us to have as a baseline.
And where's he coming out of?
Australia or New Zealand?
Okay.
New Zealand, I think.
I have a question.
Yep.
So, let's say that this Google study, the Washington Post article is really true and that those are the most successful people. How does that correlate to what we're doing here in Mineral Point, and what is that perfect sweet spot number? And can you say that it's smaller class sizes, or what can we learn from that article?
I think it's how we teach. You know,
How we teach,
Is it just us just delivering information, or is it creating environments in which kids can learn with each other? You know, when you're working in groups, I mean, giving kids need practice in whatever they want to get better at. So if we want kids to be able to collaborate and communicate, we need to give them chances to collaborate and communicate. So then, what does the environment need to look like to allow the teacher to do that?
Is there anything that we can read that would help us think about what does a space look like? And maybe it's different grade levels, or it's...
I have a couple articles too. Well, let's
Okay.
huddle up and pull our best of our best and send that out to you.
Okay.
And we'll load it back up into our board book, or we'll get a folder started and share that folder so that you have some of that information at your fingertips to start to learn about. So some best practices on what new classrooms look like and how we should be educating kids. I think that also ties into the work of our strategic plan. 20 community members got together and really said, this is what we want for our schools the next 3 to 5 years. And a lot of it is about how we educate kids and educating the whole child, not just the academic child, but how we work with social and mental wellness and health and so forth. So we need spaces to deliver those types of services other than a traditional classroom setting. So I'll layer in our strategic plan a little bit to where it's appropriate as well. Other questions? These are great because these are the things you want to know in order to be successful. Yeah.
I think someone else might have said this, but I just want to make sure. You mentioned that the classroom size, physical size square footage has been growing, but what is the average class?
900 is the industry standard for, is that your question or no?
Yeah, also like, has the number of students, optimal number of students been shrinking also? So are those actually, is the number of students, steady on that, I guess is my question.
I'm gonna reference the STAR study out of Tennessee. There's some others that have done, but essentially, the size of class after grade 5 specifically doesn't really have an impact. And it's only shown to have slightly impact in the lower grades, K1, 2. Not as much 3, 4, 5. There's a little bit of an impact, but not as significant. So I can share the STAR study and that results with you as well. It's kind of dry research, but for those that like to get into the numbers.
And Hattie talks about that too.
Yeah.
And,
sure.
And are they looking at, now, I'm just thinking about like metacognition right now, but
Good point.
are you looking at your success rate, so impact in 3, 4, 5 means better grades? Because it goes against the Washington Post
Yep.
article.
Yep.
Like, okay, you can say that, that means that we have smarter kids, great. But if they're pieces of crap in community service, I don't really care. Like, I want kids who are gonna be, involved in their community and giving back, and let's give them some of those opportunities to work with one another and collaborate. And what is the STAR study in Tennessee actually looking at for success?
Excellent point, because if you talk to any teacher, they will tell you a class of 18 versus a class of 22 is a very different class. Take 4 kids out of any classroom and it just makes a difference. So you can't quantify that in terms of academically how those kids perform with or without a class of 18 or 22, but from a subjective, from a teacher's perspective, absolutely makes a difference.
It also changes too based on class by class. I remember having a class of 28 that I taught when it was just a great class and I didn't want to be done. And then I had a class of 21 that,
You wanted to be done.
Now by January, I mean, they were killing me, so.
Let's keep that in mind. Yeah, just keep all of that in mind. What other questions?
Okay, so under one of the comments, there was someone going on about selling this building and having it be sold off to a developer to create more housing. I'd like to know how realistic that actually is.
Okay.
Because if we could make significant money off this plot, that kind of impacts the potential of a new building.
Sure.
Whereas if we can't sell this, then that's,
Okay.
Right.
You capture that okay, Joel?
And I don't know how you find that out.
Well, it's a valid question. The question is, if this were to be sold, could this be turned into housing, or would it be taken down and possibly built into, how many lots could you divide off, and what would the average price of a lot be? And so, yeah, we could find that out.
For this space right here.
This space here. Hadn't considered it, but it's a good question.
And would there even be interest in somebody coming in and doing that? That would be the other question.
And that would include
everything, right?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of
You could
space
parse it
out
out,
here.
but you
Right.
could keep the baseball field.
Mhm.
You could say it's just this.
Usually what it comes down to is what the person coming in,
Wants.
because of what I do.
Sure.
So it usually depends on what the buyer wants. So if the buyer is interested in the entire lot and that you can get a better market price for it, you're probably more likely to take it and move on. However, if they're not interested, you know, they're like, I could take it or leave it, then you may want to reserve some space and keep it for other things, whether you choose to continue to utilize it for a baseball field or whatever it is, or whether you market it off yourself and utilize that space for future development to bring money in to offset the cost of another project. So, there's different ways to look at that.
Good questions to ask, we'll dig into it.
I think you said you were gonna look into this too, but how open enrollment affects elementary versus junior high school?
Yes, so we'll parse out the elementary open enrollment separate from the rest, correct?
And then I also was wondering, I followed this as much as I could last summer, I think it was, within the Wisconsin legislature, but it was like pretty to hang on to. Was there legislation passed that would limit referendum amounts that are allowed?
Yes.
Okay.
Not the amount, but the when you can hold an election and
Yeah.
the frequency.
Yeah,
I believe
so-
now they can only be done during general elections, you can no longer have special elections,
Yeah.
so that's the primaries and the general elections. I think you're limited to now 2 per year, so if it fails, yeah, it could have been worse.
It ended up being different than, right,
Yeah.
it was gonna be worse.
And there are also studies, and we did this in the last referendum, it's the most successful time to get a referendum passed
Yeah.
is
The general
the
election.
general
Oh,
election.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
okay.
But we'll pull that law.
I guess like law
Yeah,
impacts
we'll
on
pull the
what's
law
possible.
so we have the
Yeah.
most latest and greatest, because that did change.
How long was open in, part of Wisconsin?
91, no, that's 91, 92?
In Jesse's class, there was open enrollment when you were going through.
I want to say 91, 92, but it was Milwaukee only, and then it started to move beyond. And I'm maybe getting that confused with the charter school movement, but I thought open enrollment started in Milwaukee in 91, 92, and then kind of spread statewide later. But I'll check, open
Do you know
enrollment.
if other districts have these same sorts of issues with, like, how to figure out capacity? Is this
Yeah.
something that other districts are
Yeah,
dealing with?
absolutely, yeah.
Some are losing.
Right.
Yeah.
My last district, we were losing,
To open enrollment, get enrollment.
Yeah.
was due to industry.
And geographically, it probably makes a big difference too, if you have many choices around you.
You know, Land's End moves their plant. Cummins shifts into, I can't even tell you what could happen, but one major employer like that could have a significant impact on our enrollment today, and that's what we've seen in some communities. When that dries up, other schools basically dry up as well. So, yeah, if you got any, let me know if you know of anything like that. I don't know anything like that. I'm glad to say that it's a solid industry, I think, and hope that they'll both be here for many, many years. Other questions?
I just want to make a statement that I think that the things that Joelle is talking about with having great schools, but great staff, the great staff make these schools great. And so the problem that we're all facing and the reason why we're on this committee is a really good thing. Because we could be here for a really different reason that some surrounding schools probably are facing. So this is kind of exciting to be part of this. And I want to, I'm not gonna be the chair because I won't be at a lot of, I'm hopeful that my work won't take me away from a lot of these meetings, but I'm concerned about that. But I want to, whoever is, to thank the board for allowing us to be involved. Because they could just make the decision on their own.
This is kind of a new step for the board. They haven't had an ad hoc committee. They've had some small committees to kind of study things, but nothing formal like this group that's actually gonna bring a recommendation forward. And they're gonna put some trust into this group to really vet this well and come back with a well-thought-through proposal. So we'll do our due diligence and make sure that we've done well. So with that, it's a good segue. If anybody's given some consideration to the chair, I would appreciate a willingness. If we've got more than one or two, we certainly can have a co-chair. That always works really well, because then you're not in it all alone. Or you could maybe suggest somebody. Jesse's already told she's taking herself off the table.
I would be willing to help it, but I can't guarantee that I'm gonna be at each of these because they just said to me today, you might be going at the end of January for a meeting. Well, I might not be at the next meeting. I don't wanna be committing if I can't give it all.
Anybody interested?
I vote Maggie.
Maybe you accept that nomination?
That's fine.
Okay. Would anybody like to do it with Maggie and co-chair it?
I can help you with it. I don't want to be the only one to do it, but I'll be happy to help.
I'm better at talking than like, getting things
Okay.
done.
And before I close up the nominations, anybody else wanted to get being a co-chair? Okay, thank you, appreciate you stepping into that role. I will be, again, helping you with that piece, so we form an agenda together and make sure that we're bringing good information back for the committee, and will help to steer our meetings going forward. I will try my very best to end at 8 o'clock. We all have families to get back to, and I will be respectful tonight. Those questions carried us over a little bit, so thanks for that flexibility in our first meeting. Our next meeting then in January, if I get a big interest in doing a site visit down the road, we'll build in another meeting, but if you can put those dates in, we'll start with that, and we can go forward. So the next piece will be just a board meeting on January 9th. It'll be kind of a summary of this, so I'll check to see your availabilities in just a little bit, and we'll just kind of report out, and then we'll come back in January.
If you want to, sorry.
I was just gonna say, Joel, are you gonna send out a finalized copy of the dates?
Yeah,
'Cause
that
I'm not
are
writing
from our
everything down.
2018, yes.
Okay, cool.
We will work
I'm
on
gonna
that.
hold off on adding.
Yeah, so you don't have to put all that in.
I would just propose that we go ahead and start scheduling a site visit.
Yeah,
I personally
I
would
agree,
like
I would like to, I
Okay.
agree.
I mean, for me, like the last time I really spent any significant time, a long time ago in an elementary school, and it already looks different to me.
Okay.
So seeing what other districts are doing that's even more advanced than us would be interesting.
And if anyone wants a tour of the building, just give me a call in the day when the kids are here. It's interesting to see when the kids are here. We'll be happy to do it.
Yeah, if that works in your individual schedule, please do, because when we take our tour, most likely be at night when it's empty, it's a very different building. You'll still see some things that are important, but you're right, it's a different experience. I'm gonna look to try to put in maybe a tour that second week of January after break, like after a board meeting on the 9th. That week, the 9th, or is it the 8th now? The 8th through the 15th, or that following week thereafter. When's our meeting the week after that?
23rd, 24th.
The 24th?
Because we have that 3-day convention that other week.
Okay. So look, is that too early, or are you ready? Are you anxious and let's do this thing in January? Okay, let me see if I can get something set up for the week of the 8th. Let's go quickly through, if you've got your calendars, anybody know I have a Monday conflict. I'm gonna be in a school board meeting and 2 other members are as well. How about Tuesday? Any conflicts on Tuesday the 9th? 1, Wednesday the 10th? 1, 2, 3, Thursday the 11th? 2, and we aren't gonna do a Friday, sorry. So let me look at that. I think I saw Tuesday, Wednesday. Wait, was there 3 on Wednesday?
Mhm.
Yeah, so Tuesday. That would be possibly the 9th.
I might not be here too, well, it just depends, but that's not yet.
Okay. Yeah, take a look at that. Put a tentative in there. Obviously it'll be dependent on the host school and their availability. Is anybody opposed to traveling to, I've been trying to do some of this pre-thinking. There are some new elementaries in the Dubuque area. Is that okay to travel to Dubuque? We're okay with that? Time-wise, we,
Have alternative dates for January, just weather consideration.
good point, yeah. We'll look at that next week after the 9th, maybe just as an alternative.
Just in case.
Okay, so if we get into then, Monday the 15th, Martin Luther King Day, my guess is some.
That's also a concert that night.
Concert that night. How does Tuesday the 16th look? Anybody have a conflict? Okay, I know Wednesdays and Thursdays are getting tough already, so let me just go with 2 consecutive Tuesdays. And then we meet on the 24th, right?
3rd or 4th.
3rd or 4th.
Depending on
Yep.
FDH.
I'll get that back to you as well. So that works. We got 2 consecutive Tuesdays. Put a hold on the 9th and the 16th, please. And I'll find a location near us, and we'll go visit some newer construction just to see what the new elementary looks and feels like. Fantastic. Thank you so much for saying yes to this. I've got a really positive feeling about this group. I really do. I'm engaged. I'm excited. And I'm looking forward to our work together. So anything you need along the way, I will bring business cards next time, but most people know how to get a hold of me. But I've got a personal cell. If you want to write this down, You can call and text there anytime, and I will get back to you. 608-509-3395. I'm monitoring that constantly, so again, if you want to call or text, even if it's, I'm coming to the meeting but I'm running late, go ahead and get started without me, whatever that might be, just let me know. And if you're looking for something between now and our next meeting and you want us to bring some information, give us a call. But we also have 2 co-chairs now, which will make sure your communication information is out there as well, so that you can use them as a conduit to also make requests or get things on the agenda or talk further about things that you might want to go deeper into. Okay? I'm going to hang around if you've got anything individually you want to just check in with me on. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you after the first of the year. Have a happy holiday, safe travels. I hope the weather held off.
I saw you look at her and I was like,
Of course, I'm. Yeah. I've got all the fun.